Andrew and Courtney Simpson, although childless, had been happily married for over a decade. Having children was something they both wanted, but waited until they were confident in their careers and could financially support their family on one income. They were both in their 30s and were successful lawyers. Drew was a civil law litigator and Court practiced contract law for a prominent local firm in their hometown. They had finally reached the point financially where they had agreed to attend their first American Bar Association National Convention. It was something they both had once looked forward to. During the long drive to the headquarters hotel where they had reservations for the event, their main conversation was about the baby. They both agreed it was time, but Court admitted she was anxious about the prospect. It was at the board of directors reception on Wednesday night that things fell apart. It had started well enough when they were both enjoying the atmosphere and the company of fellow attorneys. It was late in the evening, after the formal part of the reception was over, and there was more drinking, dancing, and loud talking, when Drew noticed that Court was in a playful mood. That definitely wasn't a bad thing, because it always led to marathon sex at the end of the night. Courtney was a beautiful woman with a lively personality, albeit somewhat dodgy and always flirtatious. Tonight was no exception. Drew, on the other hand, was more calm and reserved. This was very unusual for a trial lawyer. At social gatherings, Drew tended to blend into the background. He really enjoyed watching people and how they interacted. If someone started a conversation, Drew would immediately actively participate. He was just rarely the first to strike up conversations with people he didn't know. He had spent an inordinate amount of time on the dance floor this evening with numerous partners and was looking forward to returning to their hotel room. His eyes lit up as he met his gaze with his wife's dark green eyes. She had that smoky, sexy look in her eyes, and he was ready to take her right there in the club. She leaned forward, revealing most of her thigh and lush breasts. She let out a low, approving whisper and purred. "I want to have fun tonight, honey," without taking her eyes off of him. "I can see that. I can feel it too, baby. Let's go to the room. Look around, honey. We've never been in this town before. Do you see anybody you know?" Drew looked around reflexively. "No, I don't think so." "What's the matter? You want to have fun tonight?" He couldn't help but notice the heavy emphasis on the I. He was stunned. He had no doubt realized what she was talking about. But although he was deeply shaken and badly wounded, like a seasoned trial lawyer, he instinctively knew not to show his true emotions. Drew couldn't imagine where it came from. The only thing he could point to as a possible warning sign was his wife's reluctance to have a child, and yet she had just agreed to do just that. "I see, but what about our relationship?" She ignored his question. She wasn't a trial lawyer, but she knew how to question witnesses and knew not to let her opponent distract her attention. She sighed and held his hand firmly on her vulva. "Have I been a good wife? In the 15 years we've been together, have you ever had the slightest doubt about my love and total devotion to you? Since we became exclusive freshman year, name one time, one instance, just one. I know I flirt, but have you ever had any doubts about me when you've watched me do it?" You'd think she had just made the simplest of rookie mistakes a lawyer can make, asked a question she didn't know the answer to. But in truth, there was no mistake because she knew the answer. "No, there wasn't. I never had any doubts about your commitment to our relationship until 30 seconds ago. Why now?" He had accepted the inevitable. It was amazing how quiet she seemed in the middle of a nightclub with flashing lights, loud music with pounding breasts, and a DJ with over 200 drunken lawyers crowded around her. In the midst of it all, they spoke in a normal voice, but they didn't miss a syllable from each other. "I told you I'm ready to give birth. I just want this weekend to be for me. I deserve it. And on Monday, I'm throwing away my birth control pills for the sake of our future. I deserve it. And on Monday, I'm throwing away my birth control pills for the sake of our future." She pushed his hand away, leaned back in her chair, and crossed her arms over her chest, emphasizing her ample cleavage and letting him know the conversation was over. "I understand. Have you chosen anyone yet?" He naturally already knew the answer to his question. Yes, she answered quietly but firmly. Okay, one last question. What reward are you willing to pay? What kind of reward? Don't fool around with me, you're a contracts lawyer, you know what the remuneration is. What are you offering me for consideration? What price are you willing to pay? Now he was close to losing control. He was dumbfounded at how quickly his life was falling apart. Honey, the only price in question is your ego. I know that by doing this I will hurt you, and I will spend the next 30 years making that pain go away. It has nothing to do with what we have. It's Wednesday night and we don't have to check out until Saturday morning. I'll be back in our hotel room Friday night, and we'll start practicing making babies. It's going to be okay. It was over. 15 years together, over 10 years of marriage, the end of our family that would never be. No baby showers, birthday parties, first days of school, graduations, brides, or grandchildren bouncing in our laps. She just admitted to willfully hurting her husband, deliberate misbehavior, if you will. And she didn't even blink. For some reason, it didn't matter to her. All right, I'm going to bed. I don't know when I'll see you. He turned and walked away without looking back. He heard her calling for him, but he no longer cared what she said. Well, that went better than I expected, Courtney thought smugly to herself. What was that? I don't know when I'll see you thing? She thought no more about it and turned her attention to her intended target. She looked into his eyes and smiled seductively. She stood up and crept toward him. She couldn't remember his name, but she did remember that they had done some dirty dancing recently. The incredible truth was that until that very moment, she'd never once considered being unfaithful to Drew. She'd suddenly made a life-ruining decision that she really just hadn't imagined. Drew didn't know how he managed to get back to the room. He vaguely recalled someone asking if he was okay while he was in the elevator, but his head was spinning and he was in mild shock at what had happened. Everything seemed so unreal. Just 1 minute he was fantasizing about the great sex he and Court would have, and the next minute, his marriage was over. He wasn't sure how long he sat on the edge of the bed staring at the wall, but eventually a plan formed. He knew what he had to do and forced himself to go forward. It was only a 3.5-hour drive home, but Drew knew he had a couple days to get everything done. He realized that to Courtney, he didn't exist for the next 48 hours. He had plenty of time to do what needed to be done. He realized that first thing in the morning, he needed to report their joint credit card stolen. If he was lucky, some hotel maid would find Court's purse she'd left in the room and take it without reporting it. Drew wasn't going to touch anything his soon-to-be ex-wife had left in the room. He also figured that having the hotel maid pick up the purse would at least give him until Tuesday. The divorce itself would be simple and clean. They lived in an immaculate state. No children, no house, no joint assets. They had always kept their finances separate and contributed to expenses equally. They made about the same amount of money, but the divorce was the easy part. Starting over was the much harder part. Drew quickly packed his suitcase and was ready to head out the door. He paused for a moment and considered leaving her a note, but then changed his mind, stepped out into the hallway, and headed for the elevator. The sound of the room door automatically closing echoed down the hallway and signaled that he was closing the door to his previous life. A thought occurred to him on the way to the lobby, and he stopped at the front desk to see if everything was okay. My wife is in the car. We have an emergency at home and need to leave immediately. We left the keys in the room. He saw the officious clerk press a couple of keys and realized the cards were inactive. He couldn't help a slight smile as he walked outside, knowing how much trouble Courtney would be in, a couple smile as he walked outside, knowing how much trouble Courtney would be in a couple days. 7 years later, Drew sat in the hotel restaurant, sipping iced tea and waiting for his food to arrive. The seminar had indeed been interesting, and it should be a valuable learning experience to help him in his family law practice. He noted that the date on the paper someone had left on the worn vinyl seat was almost 7 years since his final divorce. Wow, time has flown by. At first, he didn't realize he'd said it out loud and, slightly embarrassed, looked around to see if anyone had heard him. He hadn't thought about Courtney in a long time. Although his divorce was relatively easy, the experience made him realize how unfair the so-called no-fault system can be to the party who has been treated unfairly. Honestly, though the system existed because some people can't handle their own shit, they acted like children and tried to wreak havoc on the other side, and the system has to step in and solve it for them. These were the cases where the old axiom, "no one wins in divorce," is actually true. In any case, it was the motivation Drew needed to change his major to family law. The truth, as he discovered, was that most divorces these days really only happen because both parties have made up their minds. There were few arguments, and both parties worked to end their situation as quickly and painlessly as possible. He dealt with any case that was presented to him. However, he did enjoy dealing with the relatively rare case of adultery, and he suspected that his client's spouse was trying to tighten the screws on his client. His musings were abruptly interrupted by a voice he still recognized, his client. His musings were abruptly interrupted by a voice he still recognized. "Hey, Drew, how you doing?" He looked up and unbelievably saw her. He couldn't have been more shocked to be hit with a cattle prod. "Hey, Court, believe it or not, I was just thinking about you. What are you doing at the family law seminar?" "I'm not attending. I'm here on another matter. Can I sit down?" "I'm sorry, of course." He gestured for her to sit down. "I'm really shocked to see you, so you'll have to forgive my manners." Wow, I really don't know what to say. She sat up straight and spoke in an angry tone. "You never even spoke to me, Drew. You never responded to any of my attempts to contact you. You never said another word to any of my family, including my mother, who, loved you very much. You didn't even show up to any of the hearings. You just walked out. I had nothing to say to you. 15 years together, and you couldn't even say fuck you before you ran away. I went up on our front porch that Monday night and was served divorce papers before I could get through the door. When I finally got inside, there wasn't a single thing in the apartment that reminded me of you or our marriage. I see you destroyed our marriage in the blink of an eye with an incredibly selfish act, and the bad guy is me. If that's all you have to say, just go away and leave me the hell alone. Drew, I'm sorry. Just get out of here, Court. Now." He turned black with rage. Most of the restaurant was now looking at them. She stood up and stumbled away in tears. Just at that moment, a whirlwind came over Drew. It was the chattering twin sisters and their little sister. They came at him full speed like they usually did. His wife was right behind them. She was laughing and smiling, but her smile quickly disappeared when she saw his face. Her gaze flickered to Courtney's rapidly receding figure. "That's her, isn't it, Drew?" He could only nod his head as he was preoccupied with the 3 children. Without another word, his wife, Celia, rushed after Courtney in a flash. Drew followed her movements with his eyes as she caught up with Courtney. They engaged in a conversation that ended with Celia helping Courtney sit down. They must have talked for at least 10 minutes. They seemed to exchange contact information, then Celia gave Courtney a hug, and they parted ways. Celia went back to the table and grabbed their youngest so Drew would have a chance to corner the twins with a fight. Drew's eyes and mouth were wide open when Celia sat back down. "She's coming over to our house in a couple weeks and you two are going to talk. I mean, really talk. Don't say anything, just nod your head if you understand." Her tone didn't allow for any objections, so he just nodded and started fighting off the 2 little monsters in his lap that were now his life. Later that night in their hotel room, after the 3 musketeers had fallen asleep, Celia looked at him and asked, "Is there anything you want to say or ask her?" He took a deep breath and spoke softly. "The first few years I wanted to, but I guess my pride wouldn't let me, but now, no, I have nothing to ask, and I'm glad I didn't give her the opportunity then." "What? You're joking. It can't be serious, can it?" It's very serious, Celia. If I'd let her talk to me then, maybe she could have said something to make me change my mind. But then I'd never have met you, and our 3 children wouldn't exist. No, I don't need to talk to her, and I don't regret anything." She put her arms around her husband and showered him with kisses. "You know what to say to a girl, don't you, baby? But the poor woman needs to talk to you, so the least you can do is sit and listen." "I will, but really, what's the point? All she's going to say is how sorry she is. If I ask her why, she'll say she doesn't really know, etc., etc. But I'll do it for you, and maybe it will help her calm down." "But why would I do that?" "Drew, be nice now. Maybe I can't define it for you, but maybe you would yell at her within a couple minutes of seeing her. Maybe that's what will close the past for you too?" "Maybe you're right, but even if you and the girls are taken out of the equation, I realized, even before I met you, that my life was better without her. The divorce made me reevaluate my life and what was important to me. Oh, sure. I went through the usual emotional turmoil that most people experience when a marriage fails. But that failure made me take a hard look at myself, something I never would have done if she hadn't acted so foolishly." Drew paused to think and catch his breath. "They say that our greatest successes can be the result of our greatest failures, and I firmly believe that's true in my case. I am much happier practicing family law now than I ever was practicing civil law. Sometimes I start to feel like I'm actually helping people. I know I don't make as much money, drive a Beamer, or live in a suite overlooking the lakeshore, but I'm happier than I've ever been in my life." "Now what about her? Maybe you should ask her that question. What's the point, Celia? I don't have the slightest regret about where I am right now." He paused and continued in a voice a little louder than a whisper. "It may not be true. I do have one regret. I should have spoken to her mother. She really is a lovely lady. I know she loved me and I liked her. Since both my parents are long gone, she was like a surrogate mother to me. And I left without saying a word to her. Celia really couldn't say anything more. She had hoped that somehow getting together would be as good for Drew as it was for Courtney. But now she had doubts as to whether that was the case. Would she force it on Drew? And it would only serve to bring out a past he no longer cared about? But would she be able to stop it? As it turned out, Celia didn't have to do anything. The meeting never took place. The night before Courtney was due in town, Celia's phone rang after midnight. At the time, she was always afraid to answer the phone for fear of bad news, but she reflexively answered it. On the other line was a clearly distraught woman. "Celia, this is Angela Jones, Courtney's mother. I need to speak to Andrew." The ringing phone woke Drew and Celia handed him the receiver. "It's for you." "Andrew, it's Angela. Courtney committed suicide yesterday afternoon." This statement was followed by the sobs of someone in so much pain it's impossible to describe. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I don't know what to say, God. It's my fault." Drew's tears were flowing now, but there were no words. Celia, who had heard all of this, had clung tightly to her husband and was now openly crying, thinking that there was some guilt in this as well. "Andrew, it's not your fault. She had a lot of problems and she brought them on herself. There's a lot you don't know about her since the divorce. She left you a sealed letter. I hid it from the police. No one knows it exists except you and me. What do you want me to do with it, Andrew? Just keep it to yourself for now and let me think about it. Can you do that?" Sure. Andrew, I need you to be with me. Can you come?" "I'll be there as soon as I can, Mom. I'm going to bring my whole family with me. I want you to meet them. I know you'll like them. I'll call you back tomorrow and we'll make a plan. Is anyone with you right now? You shouldn't be alone." "Yeah, my friend Joyce is staying with me. I can't wait to meet your family. I'll talk to you tomorrow." And the phone went dead. Courtney's memorial service was held 7 days later on a cold but clear fall afternoon, and as promised, Drew and his family were there. There were only a few people in the audience. Apparently, even though Courtney was a very competent attorney, she had no real friends. She was cremated, and the ashes were to be scattered in a park that she and Drew often visited when they were dating. Angela said it was the happiest time of Courtney's life. Losing her daughter by her own hand had been an almost unbearable burden for Angela. But she quickly grew to love Celia, and especially the three girls. By the end of the week, the girls were calling her Grammy Angie. Angela revealed what happened to Courtney's life after Drew left. He was shocked by the revelations about the risky behavior, substance abuse, and mental health issues that followed the divorce. She even explained the reason why Courtney was in the same hotel as Drew. She disappeared with two men she met at a nightclub and was gone for over a week. When she returned, she was covered in bruises. According to Angela, there was nothing unusual about that. Courtney was also close to losing her partnership at work. He was amazed at how one bad, sudden decision had thrown Courtney's life out of control. The night before Drew's family was to go home, he and Celia had a long talk and came to some decisions. The next morning, Drew took Angela aside while Celia kept the girls occupied. "Mom, we need to talk about a couple of things. First of all, Celia and I want you to come live with us. There's nothing keeping you here right now. You don't have to make a decision right away, but we want you to think very seriously about it. We'd like you to be with us. If you decide, we'll be here to help you move. Please think about it, okay? Honey, that's so sweet of you. I promise I'll think about it carefully, but I'm going to miss her so much." And she couldn't take it again. Drew put his arm around her while she tried to calm down. When she calmed down, he continued, "We need to talk about the letter. I think the best thing we can do is to take the letter and throw it unopened into this fireplace. It's a letter to you, Andrew. I know, but I'll never read it. If you give it to me, I'll burn it. However, I want to give you the opportunity to keep it. I don't know about you, but I want my memories of Courtney to last until the divorce. Your memories should also be of that time, and I worry that if we read this letter, we will remember her as she became after the divorce. I want nothing to do with that damned letter. I'm giving it to you. If you decide to read it, the only thing I would ask is that you never, and I mean never, mention anything about it to me." Angela was shocked by his answer, but began to understand Andrew's reasoning. She desperately wanted to remember her daughter as she had been before her actions had fractured her life. Maybe there was genuine remorse there and an acknowledgement of how painful her decision had been, but maybe there was only more pain inside. Andrew told her about how the meeting with Courtney had gone a few weeks ago. What if Courtney only had more anger and guilt to unleash on Andrew? Courtney wasn't in the best mental state, especially since confronting Andrew, Angela was tearing herself apart. Before they left for home, Celia also had a private conversation with Angela. "Please, please, please come live with us. We really want you to be a part of our family's life. I don't think you realize how important you are to Drew. I promise, honey, I'll think about it." "It would be nice to be around young people again," Angela said thoughtfully. As Drew and his family drove home together with tears and hugs, Angela collapsed into a chair in the living room across from the fireplace. She pulled out the letter and stared at it intently. She knew she had a decision to make. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.